Welcome to In the Light with me, Anna Isabel, an analytical hypnotherapist. And my guest today is Keith Lowenstein. And Keith is the author of Kriya Yoga for Self-Discovery. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
What is Kriya Yoga?
Kriya Yoga is yogic meditation. It is really a traditional yoga meditation, and yoga itself is primarily practices to help develop the union of body, mind, and spirit. So this is one of those practices, and it's one particular lineage in what could be referred to also as Patanjali's Yoga Sutras or Raja Yoga. There's many overlaps between those, as well as Kundalini Yoga. And so it's Kriya Yoga focuses on really the central aspects of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it has a set of practices that help the body and mind shift into states of subtler consciousness and a greater awareness. Kriya means work, and Ya refers to the breath or soul. And so it really is using the breath, using the work of the breath to unite the body, mind, and spirit, because yoga ultimately means union. So that is the goal, and the lineage that I am part of is through Sri Mahan Swami Ganeshananda Giri, who was known as Ganesh Baba, and he spent about 7 years in this country in the late 70s and the first half of the 1980s, and that's when I knew him and learned these techniques. He's part of the well-known lineage that was popularized in the book Autobiography of a Yogi that was written by Paramahansa Yogananda. So it was a very popular book in the 60s and 70s and still is readily available. And that describes, some of the lineage. Ganesh Baba also belonged to the Naga Baba lineage, and he was head of an Akara in India, as well as his Kriya lineage. He was also first made a Swami by Swami Shivananda, whose main ashram, he started the Divine Light Society. He's trained many of the well-known yogis of the last century, was a prolific writer, and his center was in Rishikesh, and it continues to this day. And so he was the first. So
The thing that struck me reading your book, excuse me, the thing that struck me reading your book was that there seemed to be different schools of yoga, and that accounts for something that I, as a Westerner, find confusing, is all these different yogas that come up. So you were talking about Kundalini yoga, and so it seems that there's lots of different schools of yoga. But would it be true to say that the aim for all of them is the union of mind, body, and spirit?
yes, absolutely. And they just have different focuses. So there's really 4 to 5 main focuses in yoga. And there's Hatha Yoga, which is what most Westerners are familiar with, because there's a yoga studio on most street corners these days. So that's Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is very important to a certain degree. But really it developed to help the body be able to sit for periods of time, right? So yoga is typically some type of meditative practice. How you do it varies. That's where the techniques vary. But keeping your body in optimal operational order, as Ganesh Baba used to like to say, is important, and stillness is important for that communion with spirit. And so if your body can sit in a proper anatomical position for extended periods of time, it helps move in that direction. But so the other types of yoga are bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and raja yoga. So bhakti yoga is much more devotional. So it much more prayer focused on the heart. Karma yoga is Mother Teresa would be an example of somebody whose life is devoted to the service of others. But then any work you do, whatever your job is, if you're honoring the people you're interacting with, that's karma yoga. And depending on how you're doing that, it could be a combination of karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Then there's jnana yoga, which is tends to be a little more focused on the intellectual side and reading the scriptures. But again, so it's knowledge based, but what kind of knowledge? And so no matter which of those you focus on, once you have success in them, it kind of morphs into the others. It's hard for them to be separate. Raja Yoga is probably the most inclusive, but it focuses the most on a scientific approach to working on your physiology. And that is where Kriya Yoga fits in. So this particular lineage of Raja Yoga is Kriya. And Kundalini is kind of another version of that. And there's a few, and that's one way that is one way to look at it. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is a description of Raja Yoga. And in it, they do refer to Kriya Yoga. And Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras has 8 parts to it. The first 2 parts are much like the 10 Commandments, how to take care of yourself and others, how to treat yourself and others. And then you move into what Kriya Yoga focuses on, which is posture, breath, one-pointed concentration or visualization, and then the incorporation of sound or repetitive mantra.
Just thinking about it, and there's a number of things that you said there, but the one that I was also interested in was the infusion of science into this, and you talk about that in the book as well. So how does science fit into this?
Well, so science typically is something where a series of procedures or actions or natural events happen the same way, right? So science finds a hypothesis and then sees if certain practices or in yoga or certain experimental techniques in the lab, if repeated, you get the same result. And so that is really what Kriya does. And Kriya has developed a series of physiological exercises that anyone in a similar state of health, if they practice them, will go through, different states of increasing awareness and more unity of the body, mind, and spirit. So in the book, they're referred to as the 4 V's: verticalization for posture, ventilation for breath or pranayama, visualization for focusing on the inner sky or the third eye, and vibrationalization, working on sound and mantra. And those combined, you learn different techniques for each one of those. And then when they all start to work together in a synchronized fashion, you enter first contemplation and then deeper states of meditation, and then move on to the later stages of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is meditation and then samadhi.
I find it really interesting, the emphasis on posture, because personally, I can't meditate unless I am sitting up very, very straight. And I've tried because on occasion I've been very tired and I just want to, you know, slouch a little bit on my sofa and attempt to go into meditation, and it never works. It just doesn't. And I think it has something to do with posture, making breathing in a particular way possible. Is that what you think? Because if you're sitting up, then obviously your diaphragm is more, it's going to expand more. Whereas if you're slouching a little bit, it's not so good.
Yeah, it's multifaceted, right? If you're slouching, your ribs are also more compressed. When you breathe, your ribs need to expand and move up. And so if your shoulders are forward and you're hunched, and you're trying to breathe, you can't fill up the upper parts of your lungs. Your lungs come all the way up to your clavicles. So pranayama is a practice from South Asia that works on a variety of breathing techniques. Really, the important part of pranayama, there's certainly different schools that say, do this breath so much, do this breath so much. But in general, the point is waking up your respiratory system to fully function in its natural way, which Western society has moved away from, because we're much more of, like you said, a leisure society, or one that's working, at desks or this or that. And then even people who are working outside, there are some people who understand the importance of keeping their body intact, but others not. So you can still be very active and be doing more manual focused work. But if your body isn't in proper anatomical alignment, you'll get injuries, and it'll be, harder for you to function. So by sitting straight, you do a number of things. Your shoulders are back, so you're able to breathe into the upper part of your lungs, and your diaphragm works better also, like you said. There's no resistance. You don't already have a bunch of pressure in your abdomen, because when you breathe, your diaphragm goes down, and it needs some space to do that. So if you're hunched over and your abdomen already has pressure there, from that, it makes it difficult. In addition, the diaphragm attaches to the lower part of your back. So if you're not maintaining a proper lumbar curve in the lower part of your back, that can affect diaphragmatic function as well. So Ganesh Baba was a great proponent of sitting straight. In fact, he would often say, straight back will bring straight breath, and that's really all you need to do.
Yeah, and as I have discovered, it's absolutely true. You mentioned visualization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, most scripture talks about inner vision, and all religions have that to some degree. And so that's the place that is probably the easiest to start to develop a one-pointed type of attention. So once you have your posture down and you've developed a fairly regular, rhythmic, full respiration with your breath, you can then start to put your attention there in the third eye area. So the spot between your eyebrows is often the easiest place to begin that practice, where you shift your attention there and watch. And now all of these are exercises in concentration. And so your mind wanders, and then you have to bring it back, and your mind wanders and you have to bring it back. And that's the practice, right? It's all a practice. There's different practices, and you have to practice the practices. And if you practice them regularly, same time of day, in the same place, that also adds, power and consistency, and your body just knows. Just like if you go to sleep at a certain time every night, you're ready to fall asleep, or you wake up, you don't need an alarm if you get up at the same time every day. Your body's just used to it. Your body will get used to moving into a meditative state at that time of day, if that's what you do every day.
I think one of the things that many people struggle with when it comes to meditation is two things. The first is the difficulty in stopping unwanted thoughts from intruding into that moment. And as we know, the trick is to just let them go, not dwell on them. But then the second one is, and I suspect that this is a fairly common one also, you manage to start clearing your mind, and the next thing you know, you're falling asleep. So now I find that again, this is where the sitting upright helps in that way. But what thoughts do you have on the fact that the minute we sit down and relax our minds, we're off dreamland, here we come?
Well, I wouldn't call meditation a technique to relax your mind. It's really a technique to invigorate your mind in a way, and to get control over your mind. And your breath really helps control your mind. So you can't really have no thoughts, right? That's now you can kind of transcend thoughts, but the practice isn't no thoughts. The practice is, concentration on, particularly for Westerners. So the types of meditation that focus more on no thoughts tend to be more for monks in monasteries, not for householders and people that are running around. So yogic meditation is helpful that way because it's giving you a lot of things to do. And then by doing those things, that in a way, that by itself gets rid of those thoughts. And then you just jump right past that to deeper states of awareness. So that's how that works. And if you don't meditate when you're tired. And if anything, meditation should have a greater sense of alertness. So doing some exercise before meditation is very helpful. So having 2-3 yoga poses that you do, maybe 4, even just 5 minutes of that. And then sitting down and then going through Kriya Yoga. So the way we teach it, certainly in the beginning, is posture, but then there's some pretty aggressive type breathing exercises to start that really are quite energizing. And those can be used periodically during meditation to help reinvigorate and allow you to go to deeper states. So there's lots of ways to work at that. So becoming distracted in meditation is not a problem, because that now, as soon as you become aware, the goal is to become aware of that sooner. So you don't want to be distracted for 10 minutes and then realize, oh, I wasn't paying attention. So when you become distracted, that's fine. And the goal is to pick it up sooner and you bring it back. And that's the practice, is bringing it back. Many people, when that happens, they say, oh, I can't meditate. But I use the example of driving often. So you're driving on the road and you're on a long drive and you drift a little out of your lane and your tires hit the little reflectors in the road and you're like, oh, and you get back in your lane and you keep going. You don't pull off the road and say, oh, I can't drive, and call someone to come pick you up. You just correct your course. And that's all you're doing in meditative practice. You're just correcting your course, just again and again and again and again.
Yes, and that's the practice, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about cultivating joy.
Well, cultivating joy. So joy really, there's a great deal of joy contained in your breath. By developing, by working on various breathing practices, you can really begin to focus to open your heart. And so that's another aspect. So in yoga, and in most traditions, there's different energy centers in the body. And And most people even say things like, oh, I feel that in my gut, or there's butterflies in my stomach, or often just putting your hand on your chest when you're moved with regards to something. And so yoga is a way to explore those different energy centers. And one way of experiencing joy with, prayer or which happens to some people, or even with song. But another way is through breath and through meditation. And there's different kinds of that joy. There's heartfelt joy, and then in deeper states of meditation, there's a more all-encompassing, timeless type of joy that can be experienced.
Well, that's I like the idea of having a moment in the day where we are cultivating joy through a very simple practice. Sometimes it's hard when you're in, let's say, emotional turmoil, to come into that calm and stillness. Does it get easier to come out of turmoil into stillness with a long practice of yoga?
Well, absolutely. And you'll go into turmoil much less frequently. And it's just the way you interact with the world shifts. So if you can look at Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, or again, the 10 Commandments, and you look at the first two parts of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are the Yamas and Niyamas. And they're, as I said before, there are ways of thinking and behaving, and then it talks about how you interact with others. And Ganesh Baba would often say, well, yes, those things are there, and some traditions teach you engage in them first. But his experience, mine as well, is if you just do these practices, those become part of who you are anyway. And so it goes hand in hand. And then, yes, with practice, you always, just a slight change in your posture or breath can shift you out of a state if things are becoming challenging, or if you're noticing things are becoming challenging for yourself at that moment, you can just make a slight shift and gain a different perspective.
Just want to take you back to when we were talking about visualization, and you were talking about it being about opening the third eye, or focusing on the third eye. Would you recommend that we use the imagination to visualize something specific?
That is one technique, right? I mean, that is one technique. There's also open-eye techniques where you pick a spot on the floor in front of you, or right where the wall hits the floor, or something, and you have a fixed gaze there. And some people, there are some traditions that focus on having an image in your mind's eye, but some people are not necessarily able to do that easily. Visualization can be hard, so it's not necessary. So just kind of observing, just kind of seeing. Maybe the word inner sky is better than third eye. There's things kind of, so what's going on in there? Can you have a focused attention there for yourself? But it also should build. Each of these build on each other, so they go in order: posture, breath, visualization, mantra. So you kind of want to become proficient in each stage first as you move forward.
It's interesting that you were talking about fixing the gaze on a spot. because that is a very well-known hypnotic technique, in fact.
Yes.
You fix your gaze on a spot in the ceiling, and it comes to the point where your eyes, naturally wants to close, and now you're shifting, and that means that the brain waves change.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
and we know that the state of hypnosis, the waves generated are similar to that of meditation. So that caught my ear when you said that. So now the other thing you talked about was sound. And so tell us a little bit about the role that sound plays in all.
Sure. And all of these things, so fixing your gaze, so you can also fix your gaze internally, right? That's kind of the same. So that's another way to describe it. And so what are these things doing? You are quieting down your senses, and shifting the focus within. So it's a kind of a redirection of having everything focused outside to having everything focused inside. So you're very, very still. So your sense of where you are in space quiets down over time. Your breath, after some practice, I mean, there's lots of pretty very substantial breathing exercises, but the goal is with time, the breath becomes so subtle, but still very, very full, and the whole autonomic nervous system calms down. So the breath is the autonomic nervous system, or automatic nervous system, controls all our bodily functions that we don't have to think about, right? Digesting food, our heart beating. I mean, thank goodness, right? We're not trying to do all those things at the same time. So, but the breath is one of those functions that is both voluntary and involuntary. So by working with the breath, you have a tremendous impact on that whole system, and it really quiets things down. And in recent years, there's been a lot of work done by Stephen Porges on the polyvagal theory, for those people who are aware of that. And Kriya Yoga just has a multitude of techniques that for eons have been utilizing what he's showing, now is possible with stimulation of the vagus nerve. So the breathing calms down, and then you get one pointed attention with your visual system. So that's closed. Your eyes aren't open, or if they are open, they're not taking in lots of different information. You kind of stop the system, so to speak. And so then the sound would be the next, right? So inner sound. So instead of outer sound, and a mantra. So what is a mantra? It's really a repetitive sound. Now it can have meaning. So if you do have, if you are part of a religion that is part of your life, Kriya Yoga teaches not to change that. Whatever your belief systems are there, you should continue that. Kriya is a foundational practice to help with the physiology of prayer. So you don't change your belief system, but you can incorporate it there at that point if you have one. So you can have a repetitive sound such as Om, or you could have a short phrase from your religious tradition that you repeat in a nice rhythmic pattern. So and then that helps with the language part of the brain, so that you don't start running along with little stories and what happened at the grocery store, you need to get gas for your car or whatever, right? So that's another way to pull everything inside, and ultimately you can hear that sound inside. Now you can listen to your breath going in and out. You can count. I mean, there's lots of ways to work with that. But some research has shown that if there's some meaning, if there's a deeper meaning to what you say, that's an added benefit. If you come from a tradition that had something like that.
Just want to take you back to calming the nervous system, and you talked about the vagus nerve. So which nerve is that specifically, just to tell our audience?
Well, it's part of the autonomic nervous system. It is actually the main part of the parasympathetic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system has two branches, the sympathetic, which is what most people have heard of, the fight or flight response, and now it's understood more as a fight, flight, or freeze response. And but that fight or flight piece is surge in adrenaline, and you're hyper alert. But the parasympathetic is the other side of that. It's the balance. It's the yin yang, so to speak, of our system. That's much more of a restorative system. It's more of a relaxing part. It allows for the body to build up. It restores again, and so that is primarily the vagus nerve. It touches most of the systems within the body, the different physiological systems, and is very calming. It's also very old, right? It's an old part of our nervous system, and it's one of the first parts of the nervous system that develop.
I was just thinking about what you said earlier about a regular practice of meditation being helpful in terms of coming out of emotional turmoil and into stillness. And it makes complete sense, because unfortunately for many people, what happens is that they're operating mostly on the sympathetic nervous system, which means that, and that of course leads to a reactionary response to all kinds of stimulus. So you're basically just going from one stimulus to another and reacting all the time. Whereas if you calm your nervous system by activating or going into the parasympathetic nervous system, what you're doing is you're calming yourself. And then that means that you are less reactive. And it means essentially that you're calmer. And I think this is possibly, well, it is one of the huge benefits of yoga and meditation, which I think is one of the reasons why I asked you on this program, because it's an incredibly important aspect of health and well-being.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And it's not that the sympathetic nervous system turns on or off, or the parasympathetic they're on or off. They're both always on. It's just the relative balance between them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's being out of kilter. And of course, for many people who feel that they're operating at a high emotional intensity, that's the symptom. It's out of kilter.
Yeah, so that's stress, and chronic stress is not great for our system. It leads to chronic diseases.
So thank you so much, Keith, for joining us on In the Light today. The book that we've been talking about once again is Kriya Yoga for Self-Discovery. In fact, I should just do that. But I am going to put the links to the book on the description box. Keith, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Yeah, so there's a website, kriyabreath.com, and there's an email link there. They can contact me there. So it's Kriya, Kriya, breath, one word, kriyabreath.com.
And I'll make sure the link is in the description box as well. Thank you once again, Keith, for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's very, very nice to meet you. All right, take care.
And thank you for joining us on In the Light today. Next time, we're going to continue to talk about the mind-body connection. So until then, goodbye.